thecoalition.com.
Hey, what's up everyone? This is Gary here, and I'm just going to talk about this new Marvel Zombies mode that just launched on Marvel Rivals. They just launched this mode yesterday actually, and I decided to check it out, and I am quite impressed. So there's a few things I want to talk about, just to cover the whole aspect of PVE in hero shooters, and how it kind of works between Marvel Rivals and Overwatch. So the way Marvel Zombies works is that you pick, 4 players pick from a selection of heroes and fight waves of zombies. Now, the Marvel Zombies property is quite popular at the moment, both in the comics and on Disney+. So, it was inevitable that they brought this mode to Marvel Rivals. But, they hit a home run in my opinion. And there's a few reasons why I think that this mode really works. So, the gist is that, you get to upgrade your abilities after each wave, allowing you to make a specific build for your hero. The heroes that are available are Magic, Blade, Jeff, Thor, and the Punisher. Obviously, we don't have access to the entire roster here, but still, what's great about these limited PvE modes is that it lets players hone in on specific characters, and because there are builds, it is a lot of work to kind of, add the whole roster to the game, because then you have to essentially make a PvE build for the whole roster and give people lots of options and stuff. So I can understand how that is a lot of work. This is actually something Blizzard tried to do with Overwatch. So, getting to Overwatch, they have done PvE modes in the past. They have the Junkertown mode, which is actually live at the moment, because, it's a Halloween mode, essentially. And that is PvE. And they also attempted their own PvE story missions, which bombed. And they bombed because it wasn't the promised story missions that Jeff Kaplan sold us on originally. Because, that was going to be much more like Diablo, and that was going to be a mode where every hero would have their own build and, progression, skill tree, and everything like that. So that was a big task, and I think at the time, Blizzard just wasn't giving, the Overwatch team the funds and the resources necessary to make it happen in a timely manner. So that's why that didn't work, and they ended up backtracking, going back on their word, and basically, they made the decision that it's going to be a much more scaled back story mode, and it's just going to be some small PvE missions. And, when I played them, it felt very soulless, even the cutscenes and everything, it wasn't good, it wasn't fun, so I think that's why it didn't work in Overwatch. The Junkertown mode is very fun though, but it's so short that, by the time you enjoy it, it's kind of over, and, I just don't see people playing it long term. It's good that it comes once a year, and, you can enjoy it for that period of time. But this Marvel Zombies mode, I think it has staying power. It has the potential to, be a mode that they could keep in the game, and people would be interested in playing the game at Marvel Rivals. So I think, Netease definitely did a good job with this. They hit the sweet spot when it comes to PvE, because it just allows you to get in and have fun. You team up with your friends, you hop in, you fight waves of enemies, you feel like you're progressing, and you're, building up your character. Your character's always getting stronger, and I think, that just serves the dopamine rush that we attribute to hero shooters nowadays, because that's really what it is. It's like giving you that dopamine hit from, and making you feel like you're actually progressing and achieving something. And this mode just does it perfectly. It's like Netease gets it. And another thing is too, like the fact that we're just given this mode without much hype beforehand allows us to appreciate it a bit more. Whereas Blizzard hyped up the story mode for a long time. Like they initially, made it seem like this was going to be like a whole different part of the game that's going to have a lot of story content. But it didn't end up being that. So we were double disappointed when it dropped, you know. So with this Marvel Zombies mode, there was no pressure at all. And one thing I'll say about Netease is they know how to try new things. They're always throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks. And I think, you know, they have that ability, whereas Blizzard doesn't, because Blizzard has to kind of think things out, you know, from a more long-term basis. So it might take a longer period of time for them to get a mode out than Netease. So I think Netease has the advantage there. Now let's talk a bit about the dynamics between Overwatch and Marvel Rivals in terms of popularity right now, because I did a review almost a year ago now in December 2024, and ever since I did my review, a lot has changed. So within the first 4 months of Marvel Rivals release, Marvel Rivals was definitely snatching the market share of the hero shooter market. Overwatch had dominated for a very long time, but Marvel Rivals came through and disrupted everything and took a lot of the player base away. And that was just based off of, you know, Marvel Rivals being more fun to play at the time. And, you know, it was new and shiny as well, so that worked in its favor. But once Blizzard got it together and started adding things like Stadium Mode and perks, it became clear when it comes to PvP that, you know, Overwatch is the main one. You know, it's the best and most balanced hero shooter out there, you know, right now. And that's because they've had, you know, 9 years, almost 10 years now of basically tracking performance and, you know, balance changes and reworking characters, and they just know what works when it comes to competitive PvP in a hero shooter. So, you know, Blizzard has that advantage. So all it took was for them to kind of fix up and start actually adding more content to the game, because let's be real, for a while there, Overwatch 2 was dead. Like, there was nothing new coming. Like, there would be a new hero, you know, every 3 months or whatever, but outside of that, it was just starting to become very bland. But, you know, once Marvel Rivals came out and started shaking things up, Blizzard knew, you know, Blizzard / Microsoft, because let's remember that Microsoft is now the parent company here. But once Marvel Rivals shook things up, Blizzard knew that they had to get back on their grind and really start serving the fan base. So yeah, and another thing that Netease has going for them right now is they have that Marvel IP, and that, you know, basically gives them a license to print money, because the amount of content they can pull from in the Marvel universe, like, they can easily come up with new modes and, you know, ideas for new things to do, new events and things like that based on what's happening in the MCU or Marvel Comics. Blizzard, on the other hand, all of their heroes are unique. So, you know, it takes a lot more R&D really for them to kind of get things moving. But Blizzard has reclaimed their title as the #1 hero shooter. It was pretty clear for me to see that, you know, from a gameplay standpoint, Overwatch was always the better game. But, you know, it took this competition between the two games for everybody to realize it. I also think the player base in Marvel Rivals is more toxic and bratty. There's a lot of people throwing games when they don't get their way, and I might have to do a whole video on things like the surrender option and why it kills the competitiveness of the game. Overwatch has toxicity too, but I face it a lot less in Overwatch than I do in Marvel Rivals. And I think in Overwatch people have more of a baseline respect for the mechanics of the game. So yeah, there's that. But I want to do a whole video on, you know, hero shooter etiquette, just because I see so much toxic behavior in these games. But just to wrap this up, you know, if Netease does decide to hone in on this PvE aspect of the game, then I think, you know, they'll have Blizzard in a chokehold, because Junkertown is fun, but, you know, Marvel Zombies has a long-term effect where your characters keep getting stronger after every match. You get more points that you can build up the characters with, you know, outside of the mode. So, you know, there's that, and then there's different difficulties to try as well. And it's just a lot of fun to keep playing with your friends and unlocking things, you know. So if Blizzard could get something like that with their PVE, you know, they could try and compete. But I think the Marvel IP just makes this whole thing stronger also. But that's all I have to say for now. I will be covering more news when it comes to these hero shooters. But, you know, for now, I think that's kind of just what I wanted to get off my mind. Do look out for another video because I do want to talk about, you know, player etiquette and things like that. But let me know what you guys think of the Marvel Zombies mode and which game you're enjoying more lately.